different. I'm still getting used to running things through Zoom and WebEx and different platforms. So if there's hiccups, I apologize. If audio or something cuts out, please feel free to chat in there's a problem, or I believe you're able to unmute at any time to ask questions or mention like, hey, something's going wrong. Yeah, so we'll just jump right in. So first problem, it wasn't moving to the next slide. So who am I? Just to start off, my name is Brandon Lobb. I am a university relations campus specialist for ViaSat's University Relations and Recruitment team. What that basically means is I am a main point of contact for all things university relations and recruitment for UCSD and the majority of our West Coast schools. I've been in the recruitment field a little over 5 years now. Prior to getting into recruitment, I taught for 2 years as a high school teacher with Teach for America in Las Vegas. I got my bachelor's from San Diego State, and I got my master's from UNLV in Las Vegas. Pause for any questions about me. And then I'm just going to give you kind of a brief overview of ViaSat in case anyone's unfamiliar before we jump into the bulk of our conversation, which will be around negotiating your first offer and any questions you might have around that. So we're just playing this video. If for some reason you can't hear audio, let me know. It's mostly just music, so it should be fine anyway. So that video makes me miss our offices quite a bit because we haven't been there in over a month, but hopefully we're back soon. So what is ViaSat? So I'm going to start, this is sort of like one of our mission statements. Half of the world has no internet access. Let's change that. So our founders have been very committed to making the world a more connected place since their founding nearly 35 years ago. And at the heart of what we do is we connect people. That's what ViaSat does. And what we're eyeing is becoming the first global internet service provider. So our history dates back to us being a communications company and providing communications a variety of different ways. But we are an internet service provider, and we are going to be the first global ISP. So we're launching 3 satellites in the next few years that'll give us worldwide connectivity. So you can see from this slide that through 3 satellites, we'll be able to give internet service anywhere in the world. Are there any questions about ViaSat broadly before I move on to sort of the bulk of what we'll be talking about? Pause. No questions in the Q&A. All right then. So we'll jump in into the bulk of the session on how to navigate an offer. Goes. So congratulations, you have a job offer. That's fantastic. Now what? So it's really important that you understand what happens after you have an offer, and you don't just jump straight to like, I want to accept, right? So you need to have a good understanding of the offer and what the total offer package is. So we're going to break it down into 3 real areas, or 3 learning objectives. So create a better understanding of the offer package, because it's not just your salary. Think about what's important to you. So what is important for your career trajectory, what's important for you in the short term, and what's important for you in the long term. Define and describe the different types of compensation and benefits. Again, it's not just that number that's on your offer letter. There's usually a lot more that goes into making that compensation and benefits package. So I want you to leave having a better understanding of that. So compensation, right? That's the money received by an employee from an employer as salary or wages for the work that they do. And there are 2 types of compensation. There's direct compensation and indirect compensation. So we're gonna do a little bit of, I wanna get some involvement from y'all. And also this will help to make sure that you're able to unmute yourselves. Can anyone tell me an example of direct compensation? We have 22 on here, so I'm sure somebody has an idea. You can also chat it in if that's easier. Your salary, paid time off. Cool. Yeah, so your salary is definitely direct compensation, right? You're doing work and you are paid for it. So that is a form of direct compensation. Good. How about indirect compensation? What might that be? Yeah, good. Health benefits and actually PTO, that would all be lumped in indirect compensation. Other stuff like, hey, what are the benefits of working at this office? So you saw from that video, our offices are pretty cool. So that's an indirect form of compensation, right? The kind of environment you're working in can be considered an indirect form of compensation. Awesome. So what goes into determining an employee's compensation? There's actually a whole bunch of different factors, right? And I think a misunderstanding from a lot of people is that recruiters kind of just pull numbers out of the air in deciding what the pay is going to be in that offer letter. And that's not the case. There is a ton of work that goes in every year pretty much to building out compensation matrices and understanding what the value is for individual roles and for individual people when we make offers. So the external market plays a big factor. Internal equity plays a big factor, which means we wouldn't want to bring somebody in grossly overpaid or underpaid in comparison to their colleagues doing similar or the same work. What responsibilities you'll have, how scarce is the skill set that you offer. So if you do something very, very unique that we really, really need, the odds are we're going to have to pay you more, right? Because you have a very unique skill set. The impact you have on ViaSat, or any company, so the impact you're going to make. So if they do not hire you, what kind of impact is that going to make? If it's a really high impact, it's going to likely lead to higher compensation. Unique capabilities, so that's similar to skill scarcity. What is it you bring to the table that's unique? Leadership, if they see a potential leadership trajectory for you where they're going to really invest in you and the company wants you to become a leader, they will oftentimes put you on that path and that'll affect your compensation. And performance, do you have a history of being a top performer? Because if you do, oftentimes you will be paid in that regard. So these are all things that are factors that are a conversation prior to you ever getting your offer. And some of these are prior to you ever being in the interview stage. So external market, internal equity, role responsibility, skill scarcity, those are all things that are talked about when the opening is worked through with the recruiting team and the company. So direct forms of compensation, like we talked about, right? That's your pay. And there are two forms of direct compensation, your salary or your hourly wage. So they are different. So salary is considered exempt pay, right? Exempt positions are paid a set salary based on the job they're performing. The actual hours worked may occasionally vary, but the salary compensated remains the same. So you have a set salary a year that does not change based on your hours. Generally, most of the time it's just expected that you're going to work 40 hours a week, but sometimes it's more than that. And what being an exempt employee allows is a lot of flexibility in your work schedule and a lot of flexibility in your work hours. So for myself, I'm an exempt employee, and it's very necessary to my job to be salary exempt because in recruiting, there's a lot of travel and there's a lot of days where I work 10, 11, 12 hours because travel is considered work time if you're traveling for business. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to consider that hourly. Flying on a plane, right? If I fly from San Diego to Texas, that's hours of travel time that if I was hourly, they'd have to pay me an hourly rate for that. Whereas hourly employees, right? It's just like I'm sure you're most familiar with, you're paid a set wage per hour. And then overtime laws apply, and they're different for each state. Is there any questions on the two types of direct forms of compensation before I move on? Pop up this little chat box. Okay, no questions. So indirect forms of compensation, like we talked about, benefits is a huge one, right? Your health, your dental, your vision, all of that stuff. And then another one is your total rewards and providing for your future. So your retirement, are you getting an education reimbursement if you decide to go back to school? Will they provide you with career development? Are you getting stock in the company? All that stuff is outside of your direct pay, right? Work-life balance, I think that's something that a lot of people don't consider in compensation, but it really is. So vacation, paid time off, sick time, but also, are they gonna reimburse you for a gym membership? Is there an on-site gym? Is there food? What are the company events? Do they have holiday parties? All of that stuff really goes a long way in making sure you're happy in the position you have. So what does that work-life balance look like? So these three factors really impact your indirect forms of compensation. And I think it's really important that you understand direct and indirect forms of compensation when you're navigating an offer, because there will be companies that offer a slightly higher direct form of compensation, but less indirect forms of indirect compensation, and vice versa, right? So you got to find where that balance for you makes the most sense. So most companies will offer you something like this along with your offer letter, and this is just a benefits at a glance. And all this is a fairly high level summary of what benefits you have to you, offered to you when you accept an offer of employment with that company, right? So here it's a breakdown of our two health plans at ViaSat, and you can kind of see that there's slight differences. So you can see from this offer or benefits at a glance page, you do have some choices, and you can get kind of a base level understanding. So you're making an educated decision when you accept your offer or don't with any company. And every company will offer something like this. Looks different for different companies, but just wanted to give you a look that benefits at a glance, they might name it something else, benefit overview, something like that. You will generally get this along with your offer letter so you can make the best decision. And again, reiterating, what's important to you? Think about the full package, your quality of work life, benefits, culture, in addition to the money. It's not all just the money. If you're working for a company, most of the time they will pay you a fair wage. So it's kind of all those other things I think are a really big part of why you make a decision. So what do you want? What motivates you personally and professionally? Consider who you'll be working with. Think of the long and short term. Give yourself enough time to think about your decision. Talk to the recruiter if you need time. That in itself is a negotiation. If they say, we're going to give you a week, but you really want 2 weeks, have that conversation with your recruiter. Location, where do you want to be and why? Do you think you can settle in this place? Is it okay to you to relocate? What is that conversation? What is the company culture? Is it something you feel connected to? Is the company doing something you believe in? Is the company living up to your values? Those are all things to consider. And happiness is priceless. That is really true. If you are miserable but are making more money versus somewhere you might be making less but you'd be happier, those are things you probably should consider. I'm gonna pause because we're kind of cooking through this. Is there any questions before I move on? I'll open the chat box. Any questions? Okie dokie. So in reviewing your offer, here's some things to think about. Think about what you want from this opportunity. What motivates you personally and professionally? Do you really want to feel fulfillment from the impact of your work? So that's really important to some people not so much. They don't mind just being a piece of a bigger picture and they don't really need to see the full impact. That all is up to you. Career growth opportunities. Do you want to stay somewhere and see yourself grow, or do you see this position as kind of a springboard to something else? Name and brand recognition on your resume. Is that important to you? Do you want, like I said, that springboard effect? Do you want this position to be something that kind of bolsters your resume? Something to think about. Think about the full package, not just the money, like we talked about with indirect compensation. Keep in mind, this is a short-term and long-term, right? So even if you're considering this is a short-term placement, think about how that might impact you long-term. And then again, give yourself enough time to think about your decision. And lastly, company culture is incredibly important. You're going to be spending a lot of time at whatever place you decide to work at, right? At least 40 hours a week in most cases. Think about company culture. Think about what's going to make you happy. So here's something pretty handy, and this is going to be recorded, but if you want to write these down, I think this is a pretty good, just quick checklist when you're going through negotiating your offer, so you don't forget anything and you feel really good coming out of it. There's a lot of students and people in general who feel very apprehensive when they get a job offer and they decide they want to negotiate. These are good things to just kind of check through. So do you know the salary range for the position? You can ask the recruiter this. Don't feel embarrassed to ask, like, hey, what is the salary range for this position? They should tell you at any point in the interview or hiring process what the salary range is. So don't feel scared to do that. Also, put your number out first. Put the number you're looking for out as an anchor so they know where you stand. Be realistic during the negotiation process. So that kind of ties in number 2. You need to understand what the range is, and also in general, what is the sort of range in the market, so you're not like ridiculously off base, right? So if the market range for whatever job X is $80,000 a year, right? And you go into the negotiation and you put out your number first, but you say, I want $160,000 a year. You're not really being realistic during the negotiation process, and it really hurts your case. And sometimes the recruiters will be honest and say, that's way out of our range. This is our range. I don't think we're going to be able to meet in the middle. So that's really hard on a negotiation process. So be very realistic. Back up your request with your experience and your performance. Recruiters want to hire people. At the end of the day, it's our job to get people hired, right? They want justification to get you the salary you're asking, okay? They don't want to tell you no. But you need to give them some ammunition to go back to the hiring team, go back to the manager, go back to whoever's making the final decisions on salary and say, this is why they are worthy of this higher end salary range, right? You have to give them some ammo. So I worked on X and X project and it was extremely successful. And I saved this small business I interned with $100,000 a year, right? By this project I did. Something like that. Provide them with the ammunition to go back to their team and fight on your behalf. Again, recruiters want to hire you. That's their whole job. So give them some ammunition to go back. We got a question. Would you tell them if you're waiting for an offer from another company? Yes, I would tell them right up front, your recruiter, like, hey, I'm also waiting for another offer from another company. Here is the respond by date from them, or here's when I'm expecting to hear from them. And the recruiter should work with you. There are cases where a position is like a must fill ASAP and they'll tell you that. But that's relatively rare. So yeah, I would be, in all of this, transparency is key. The recruiters will try to be as transparent as possible. I would also say you should be transparent as possible. Market range question. Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second. Cool. Whoop. There we go. And lastly, be willing to compromise and learn about compensation opportunities after hire. So you might not get exactly what you want, but if you get, a compensation that you're satisfied with, you can then talk about how might you reevaluate salary on a yearly basis or whenever that company does that. So being aware of the facts, right? This is just a little helpful advice for you as you go into negotiating your salary. Drinking caffeine has been shown to make you more resistant to persuasion, allowing you to stand your ground. So drinking coffee, drinking an energy drink makes you less persuasive or persuadable. Asking for a specific number, like I said, improves your chances for success. 20% of candidates never negotiate their salary. So it's in your benefit to do it. 59% say they are dread negotiating and it makes them nervous. So most people don't like it, right? It makes you really apprehensive about the idea of negotiating. That's okay, it's normal. Only 38% of millennials negotiate their offer compared to 48% of boomers and 46% of Gen X. And the average age in corporate America, average raise in corporate America is 3 to 5%. Ask now. So that's super important. Because the average raise is only 3 to 5%, you want to maximize your earning potential in the beginning. So if you are able to get more in your base salary in the beginning, all those 3 to 5% raises the rest of your career, right, are going to be factors of that initial number. So you want to get that base higher. I actually am pro higher base salary instead of bonuses. A lot of students like the bonus. I think long-term base salary is a better way to go. Is the average raise same for contractors? I'm not exactly sure. I think it would depend on the company and depend on the contractor, right? So usually raises are based if you stay with the same company. So if you were in a contract, year-over-year contract with the same company, I'd imagine it's the same. So some do's and don'ts during the negotiation. Discuss your experience. Discuss your performance in similar positions. So that could be internships or other jobs or projects at school, whatever. Explain clearly why you deserve the top pay range, right? You're going to get that range from the recruiter. Explain why you think you should be in the top percent of that range. Say you're open to stock and bonus options, right? If they can't move on that number for a base salary, say you're open to other forms of compensation. Stick with an exact number. Don't be like, around this number. Say firmly numbers. Don't be afraid to counter their offers. So if you get a counter offer, you can counter it back. Always use positive language rather than negative. So stick with saying like, I'm really excited about taking this opportunity. I think this will be really great. But here's what I think my value is and what I can add to the team, right? It's a very positive language. Be aware of your tone and body language. So don't seem bored, don't seem apathetic, don't seem angry. Again, stay positive. Don't say things like you'll walk away unless your demands are met. That's just not professional. Don't say your job description was misleading. Don't threaten the other person, again, by like saying, I'm gonna walk away, or I'm gonna leave you a bad review, something like that. Don't come across boastful about your skill set or cocky. It's good to be confident, but you can cross easily into that line of cocky, and you don't wanna do that. Don't disclose your current salary. You have no obligations to disclose your salary. In fact, it is illegal for recruiters to ask you what your current salary is. They can ask what you're looking for in a new position, but they can't ask for your current salary. Don't apologize for negotiating. Recruiters expect it. It's totally fine. We have no problem with it, so don't worry about that. And lastly, don't say, oh, I know someone that works here and they make X. Salaries are private information, so that's just kind of a red flag. You shouldn't use that as a negotiation tool. Common mistakes: having unreasonable asks in your counteroffer. Like I said in that other example, asking for 160,000 when the range for that position is the 80,000s, right? Negotiating without providing the value you offer. You just say like, oh no, I want $100,000 a year, and that's it. You don't have any reason, no justification. It's not a good negotiation. Not being prepared, not taking your time and doing your research. Again, that is a problem. Accepting the job offer before you work out salary details and keeping the numbers low. So if you just say, you get excited and you say, yes, I'm accepting the job offer, and then you go back and want to negotiate after you've already accepted, that's a bad look. And then lastly, again, back to the idea of being unrealistic, asking for way too much when you're making a counter offer. Because recruiters, time's super valuable. So if we think we can't meet you somewhere that's realistic, we might just say that, like, hey, I think we're too far off. We were excited to have you, but I don't want you to be disappointed with the offer that we would counter with. So we're not going to extend you another offer. Usually you can still say like, okay, I will actually meet you closer, but that just kind of deters us in the conversation, right?
Brandon?
Yep.
I have some questions, and I'm wondering if you have just kind of like a ballpark type answer.
Mm-hmm.
So is there an acceptable number? Like, let's say you're fighting for, like, is 5,000 to 10,000 more in like the range that you should shoot for if you're trying to negotiate, or just depends?
I think it depends, right? And that's why it's important, one, to ask the salary range from the recruiter. Because if they tell you, oh, the salary range for this position is 72 to 85,000, right? So you understand right there, that's the range. Mm-hmm. You could potentially say like, I understand that I was looking to find a position in the 90,000, around 90,000, but I'm really excited to work at your company. I see all the other benefits of working there. I'd be happy to take 85,000 and some sort of stock compensation or bonus. Mm-hmm. Could we work around that? Because I'm really excited to work there. I don't mind coming into the company and showing my worth and evaluating my salary next year or whenever we do salary reviews. But being upfront with, this is the number I wanted, I'm willing to work with you, come down. And it's still in that range, right?
Right.
I don't think there's any like golden number. I think just being realistic, do a gut check with yourself. Like, am I being a little crazy here?
And thinking big picture for indirect compensation.
Yeah, so making that balance between indirect, direct. What is the value of working at this place, right? Why do I want to work there versus somewhere else? If that's important to you, maybe, you know, that $2,000 a year isn't going to make or break you. So you've made that decision. Mm-hmm. And then so someone asked the question about where to find resources. So I don't advise Glassdoor as the best place to find salary information. It has some stuff, but it's a pretty wide range. Salary.com is pretty good because you can do stuff by location, job title, and education level. PayScale is another one. Indeed, Salary Expert. None of these are perfect. What I would say is use all of these plus Glassdoor to get an idea of what the salary ranges are, and then asking the recruiter. That gives you the most holistic look at what the salary range for any position is, right? So you're just trying to get the best picture possible. Check if there are any more questions. If I am told that I have a salary negotiation opportunity, 6 months, can I do so? Yeah, so every company usually has a different cadence in which they do reviews and salary negotiations. So asking your recruiter what that policy is, I would do it. It's not really a salary negotiation once you're already hired. It's more a discussion about compensation adjustment and raises, and it's based on performance the vast majority of the time. I would so that's a good point. So does the negotiation usually happen in person, or is email, telephone also common? I would never negotiate over email. A lot of times they happen over telephone. I'd say the vast majority, because you're interacting with your recruiter and they'll be calling you when they have an offer for you. If you want to discuss compensation for your offer, I would email your recruiter and ask if you could talk about your offer over the phone and set up a telephone conversation. I would not do it in email. How do the recruiters make their own calculations? Good. So for every role, we do have that salary range that we're given when the role is open, and that's usually by the hiring manager and their manager who's in charge of the budget. So we're given that salary range, and we do the calculation based off a few things. So experience, the role, location, all of that. And then we do usually have a little bit of wiggle room within our own sort of ranges, that if you make a good offer, if you're only asking for, let's say, $500 or more, which is like nothing, right, in the scheme of things, we would probably bump it up, right? If you're like, oh, I am offered 8,500, but or 85,000, and I really wanted 85,500, right? It's a little petty, but right, that's kind of within that margin of, we probably wouldn't need to get further approval for that, and we'd probably just push that through. That wiggle room really depends on the company, the role. It's different for every position, right? Location has a large factor to do with that. So if the location is like remote, we don't really do remote roles, but I know companies do. I hired for companies to do. The salary range is pretty huge, right? Because the cost of living in Arizona versus San Diego is vastly different. So we would factor in that. Where are you actually located when you work? Where are you going to be filing your taxes? And we'd usually base that off like, what's your home address? It depends, each company. So the question is, do you usually get the first offer via email? Your common practice is you will get contacted by the recruiter, and we will make like contact with you via the phone and walk you through the offer verbally. Then you'll get the email of the offer. Some places do that differently, but I'd say general practice is it's a phone call to get your first offer. So some quick things to say, some reminders of things to say when you're doing or talking to your recruiter. So say thank you. Continue to use that positive language. I'm excited about the opportunity to work together. Do your research. Take a few days. That's okay. When you get the offer, you can take a couple of days, a few days to do your research and kind of get your head together before you start negotiating. Market value and your value. So understand how those two things go together. What do you think your value is versus what the market value is? And follow up. So follow up with your recruiter and have those conversations. So open it back up. Boop. sorry. Back to the questions. I wouldn't jump straight. So the question is, you're not expected to negotiate immediately though, right? I wouldn't jump straight into it. I would do your research first. So give it at least a day or so. Tell the recruiter like, oh, thank you so much. Let me read over the details of the offer and then I'll be back in touch with you. How can I compare my value to my market value? I think you should do your research on the market value and then think about what it is that will make you happy, both salary wise and indirect compensation wise, and try to marry those two and see, is there a compromise there? If you see that your market value is far lower than what you think you should be making, there's not a lot a recruiter can do about that, right? That's just how it is. Any other questions? Feel free to hop off mute if you can, if you want to ask anything out loud. Oh. Looks like there's something in the chat. Can putting in initial salary on the online application hurt your chances of getting a position? So like saying what you're hopeful for? No. What are ways to increase your market value in your current position? Depends on the company. So if you're in a role and you want to increase your value, do really great work, build value within the company, potentially go back to school. Those are the ways that I would suggest. Is it common to negotiate for interns? I would say no, not really. Generally, intern pay is based off of a percentage of what your full-time would be. And since it's such a short term, it's really like the difference in pay, like that, because it's so short term, the discrepancies in the scale become so little that you'd be negotiating over very, very small numbers. So it's really, we don't negotiate intern offers. We can work with you if you have certain circumstances around like relocation or stuff like that. Companies generally will talk to you about that if there are special circumstances, but just generally like, oh, I want to make $30 an hour and you're offering me 20. We would say our salary ranges are predetermined for interns. How do private companies price stock options? We don't price. So each company has a different process for how they want to give stock. For us, we give restricted stock units. So they have a certain mark. We tell you you're going to get $2,000 worth of stock, right, or whatever, and then we give you that stock after it's vested over 4 years, and then that's 100% yours. But it's different for every company, so that's kind of hard to say. It's fair to so the question is it fair to disclose what other companies are willing to offer? I think it's fair if you actually have that offer in hand. I think it's disingenuous if you say, oh, other companies are offering this, but you don't have that offer. That's pretty disingenuous. I would say if you have an offer from a different company, you can say like, hey, this company's offering me this. I just wanted to see if we could work towards this number. Like if you have a company that's making you an offer, but you would rather work at the company you're negotiating with, you can tell them like, hey, I have another offer with this amount. If we can get close to it, I would prefer to work with you. It's totally cool. I am not sure how you could compare stock options between companies. That's not something that's generally super public. It's also something that can change fairly dynamically within a company. Would it be appropriate to negotiate a longer vesting period for a higher salary? Again, company to company, we won't do that. Like, that's not a conversation we have on my team. I work specifically with like early career, so university grads and interns. That might be a conversation for people farther along in their career, but in general, that's not something I've heard a lot of. Oh yeah, and now you should be able to come off mute if you would like to ask a question. So if you're someone who has gotten your PhD, master's, etc., how do you go about determining your value? Same way. Do your research. Again, a lot of those websites will give you breakdowns for different education levels and experience levels. Same thing. When you're in that conversation with your recruiter, they know what your education level is and they'll tell you the scale.
Brandon, did you answer Michelle's question in the chat? It said, can putting an initial salary on the online application hurt your chances?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I answered, but I'll repeat. No, it shouldn't.
Okay. Brandon, are you able to offer some more examples? I know you said that saying that you worked on a project and saved the company money is leverage for you to negotiate kind of a little bit more.
Yeah, so examples of
maybe
like kind of giving examples of your value.
Something that you've heard or that you've
Yeah, so for example, in our Tempe office, we do a lot of work around radio frequency technologies, and certain aspects of it are fairly niche skill sets. So let's say you were doing something like that where you knew your skill set was pretty specific. You could say like, hey, I have experience working on RF technologies that are very similar to the RF technologies that I know ViaSat's doing. Here's examples of the projects I've done. I think because of this, I'm uniquely positioned to be successful at your company. I really want to work there, and I think I can add a lot of value. That's why I'm asking for a salary that's X higher than what this initial offer is. Something like that, right? So give examples of what you've done, what you can do, and what value you'd add to the company as justification for why you deserve a higher salary or whatever you're trying to negotiate.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
Hi, Brandon. Do you mind if I ask a question?
Go for it.
So in my case, I applied to a position that didn't necessarily specify if it was for a bachelor's degree or master's degree. Mm-hmm. I have a master's degree, and from talking with a recruiter, they said like, they asked for my salary range. I said like 90 to 100, and they said, well, I think we were more like 75 to 85, but you have a master's, so maybe we can discuss. It sounds to me like they weren't necessarily, they had set a salary range lower than what I'm coming in with.
Yep.
Do you think because I have a master's degree is a reason I can ask them to increase that? Does that make sense?
I think you can ask. So it sounds like that conversation then would lead to the recruiter going back to the team and saying like, hey, mm-hmm. they're looking for more like 90 to 100. I know our top end's 85 right now, but, and usually the conversation goes like this, you guys really liked him in the interview. There's obviously a lot he can add. Can we try to meet them halfway or something like that? Or can we try to meet them at 90? because that's the
Okay.
that's the lowest end they were hoping for, and that's going a little over our high end. How that conversation goes depends on the company, depends on the position. But yeah, if the position did say they were looking for a bachelor's and you have a master's, you know, the pay is reflective of what the scale is reflective of what they were looking for. There's also the chance the company will be like, well, they knew when they applied that this was for a bachelor's degree. They have a master's, but the best we can do is top out the salary range we gave. That could
Got
happen.
it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think what makes students uneasy and people uneasy about negotiating the salary is there's no clear-cut answer, right? Like, so that last example, there's no perfect scenario. There's no right answer to that question. It all very much depends. That's why I reiterate, like, it's a conversation, and it can be sometimes a fairly long conversation and multiple discussions about compensation, about your offer, and kind of be comfortable with that. As long as you stay positive, do your research, it's going to be okay. So I think I answered the can you offer examples of leverage. Should we negotiate job offers for postdoc positions, fellowship positions? I think it depends on the company. I think it's hard to say for sure one way or another. If you're unsure, you can always ask the recruiter. Any other questions?
All right, Brandon, thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me. And yeah.
All right, I'll go ahead and share the slides if I can too. If you can send me the slides, Brandon.
Yep, I'll forward them to you.
Okay, awesome. And I'll upload this video to the IDEA YouTube channel, so go ahead and look for that probably next week if you want to share it with any other folks that might find this talk useful. Thanks to everybody. Brandon, have a great weekend, and we really appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you all. Be safe.